FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. It's August 21st, 2017. Let's have an eclipse. We're already getting a lunar eclipse. Well, I think we're getting a total eclipse of the heart, as the song went. Dr. John Huber, well-noted psychologist, with us now, talking about the psychology behind hate group behavior and the mental impact of removing symbolic memorials. I mean, there's a heck of a lot of statues that I don't like. Dr. Huber, welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you for having me back on, Kerry. Hope you're having a great eclipse day.
Yeah, well, hopefully I'll see a little bit of it. And I'd be remiss not to tell you and urge you to send your emails to kl@kerrylutz.com. And we are a little bit behind right now, but promise, I will answer all. So, Doctor, this obviously is brought on by the Charlottesville situation. My own personal opinion is it was a setup, and there's nefarious powers that thrive when there's social unrest and getting their agenda through. But nonetheless, in spite of that fact, I think there's legitimate concern and issues raised by what happened there.
I think there are, but at the same time, like when I have patients who come in who have kind of a distorted perspective on life, I like to give them a different perspective to look at. And one of them, with what happened in Charlottesville, that we need to think about is that, you know, the best guess, there were several hundred people there. So let's assume it was 1,000 people that were there total on both sides. You put that in perspective, Monday morning, 145 million people got up and went to work and didn't run over the person walking down the sidewalk who was a different color, didn't stab the person in their office who's a different hair color or eye color, or spoke a different language.
Yeah.
83% of us donate to charities every year, whether we're donating time or money or physical items. To say that this is a reflection of what's really going on in this country right now, I think is a misnomer. I think you're right in your statement that it's kind of being driven by powers that we don't see right now. And I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind. You know, we are, as in general, probably one of the safest place to be in the world right now if you're worried about these types of actions. And maybe a little less fear-mongering might help us a little bit in this country.
And I understand people, how they might feel about even some of these monuments, but these monuments have been there, Doctor, 152 years since the Civil War ended. Now, granted, for the first 100 years, they didn't have much to say about it, African Americans. But for the past 50 years, all of a sudden, this becomes an urgent matter to take these statues down. I mean, they just did it in your state in Texas at UT Austin. They took them off the campus.
Secretly.
Yeah.
Secretly.
Moved them to some museum display.
Right. I think it's all contrived. I mean, we just got through having the first African-American president who had control of the House and Senate. And if it was that big of a deal, he could have real easily just gone through and done it that way. The problem is this becomes a slippery slope. This makes me uncomfortable. That makes me uncomfortable. You know, there were statements out there, you know, when we were debating same-sex marriages and people saying, well, even Martin Luther King was against same-sex marriages. Whoops, we got to take down his statues now and change all the street names that we already had renamed into his name. You know, where does it stop?
That's a good question, and I don't have the answer. But I will tell you this. There's a town in Florida, city in Florida called Riviera Beach. And what did they do? There was Dixie Highway, and they changed the name of Dixie Highway to Barack Obama Highway. And, you know, I'm not sure what they proved by it, but I guess they felt better.
Well, changing all these things, it's not usually in the best interest, and putting things in museums also isn't in the best interest. You know, people I've been to the Metropolitan Museum several times, and I only remember one or two main things there. I can't go through and list off all the different items that I saw. But when I drive down the street and I see the name of somebody, it makes me think of where that came from and who they are. And there's a reason why people put those monuments up for good and bad people. I mean, we did not bulldoze Auschwitz because we want to make sure we remember what we did. Look at our Constitution. When we change an amendment, we don't just erase it. We just strike through it so you can still read it. So, because at one point that sounded like a good idea. It might again in the future. But with the strike through, we know we made a mistake and not to go there again.
And that's a great point. So maybe, and like Robert E. Lee, he was a very reluctant warrior. He didn't really want to be in that position. The guy was a hero in the Mexican-American War in 1840. He was top of his class at West Point, and he was a brilliant man. And he personally, I don't believe, owned any slaves.
No, he did not.
So why gang up on poor Robert E. Lee?
It's people who are reacting and probably, like you said earlier, stimulated by outside forces, and they don't really know what they're doing because they're not educated themselves.
Yeah. And then, well, we could get into the whole reason for the Civil War. The South still calls it the War of Northern Aggression. I mean, I would say whatever the reasons were that precipitated it, if there was no slavery, there probably would have never been a Civil War. But nonetheless, it's 150 years already. Look, people died in the country to end it. And I thought the Civil War was over.
Right. I did too. I mean, we've gone through, we made several changes to our law, allowing minorities to vote, to own property, and put them on a level playing field. We have affirmative action, things like that. If we were still hung up in this as a country, I'm not saying there aren't individuals or small groups of people, but as a country, we would be moving to get rid of those things. Mm-hmm. And, I don't see that is where we need to be going right now, or that we are trying to go that way at the moment.
No, I mean, there might be individuals who are behind, the nationalists, the neo-Nazis, whatever, but there's such a small, minor fringe that...
Well, and the history of those too, those are all socialist-driven, communist-driven organizations. To say that they're all, conservative Republican organizations all of a sudden is kind of a misnomer as well.
Yeah, and the KKK was pretty much a democratic organization. I mean, look, Robert Byrd, who was everything in West Virginia was named after, was a Grand Kleagle of the Klan. So when are they going to start renaming stuff in West Virginia to take that deplorable name off of like every public building?
Right.
Robert Byrd, medical center, highway, I mean, stadiums, everything's got that guy's name on it. He had a real edifice complex. So...
Well, all this stuff we're talking about really stems around a key element of education, knowing what we're actually standing up for. And that's one of the problems with hate groups is oftentimes they don't know enough about the situation or they're ignoring information because they don't want to have to admit that maybe there's something they need to do to change their life. And so they target things that are indisputable, like someone's skin color, but there's nothing anybody can do about it. So they can always somehow be a little bit better than you, and you can somehow be a little less human. Yeah. And that's a significant problem with hate groups altogether because you can't rationalize with them.
No, you cannot. And you can't live in the past, which I think some of these ultra-nationalist groups are more or less doing here, right? I mean, they're just living in the past or trying to regain the greatness or the South or whatever. It's really difficult to know exactly what they want here, other than maybe to just be heard because they're feeling insignificant and, their way of life, all sorts of things happening in the country that have changed what they were doing and the way they were living.
I think you're correct on all of that. I don't see anything wrong with what you said in any of that situation.
Yeah.
So as individuals, I think, most Americans are pretty together, pretty smart people. And we can say that across the board. What happens is then you get more than 2 or 3 people in there and they start getting less and less rational, less and less intelligent too. So that makes everything even worse because now you got groupthink going on and you got 1 or 2 people that are highly emotionally motivated. And it's really easy for everybody else just to kind of settle down into that reactionary phase and just react and say, wait a minute, this isn't necessarily what we should be doing.
So, Doctor, you think this is something that's going to end shortly, or are we going to be faced with this for quite a while to come?
Well, I think the powers that be are grasping at straws and trying to stir stuff up. You notice that there's several groups out there who's trying to direct all this corruption in the election we had on Russia at one party, and all of a sudden the evidence starts coming back that maybe it was the other party that was actually interacting with them illegally, and they're seeing exchanges of dollars and stuff hitting the news, and all of a sudden that Russia's gone, and now we got this racism event. So once we start coming to a conclusion that this is somehow contrived, I imagine there'll be a new trauma that we have to deal with.
You think so, huh? So there's always something like Saturday Night Live.
Rosanna.
Yeah, there's always something. So what's going to be the next thing? I mean, you can pretty much predict what these people they're going to come up with something else. And it's really obvious, at least to me, these contrivances, they're all,
right,
just created to distract or whatever. So,
well, I read an article last night that talked about how the universe is racist because the solar eclipse is going through primarily white communities across the United States, and
really?
Not enough minorities are going to be able to experience it. So
I didn't know that.
I mean, they could pull it out of anywhere if you want to know the truth.
Yeah, well, they can and they do. And so I just wonder, you got to make yourself immune to this and understand the techniques and such that they're using here, right?
Exactly. And like I would tell my college students, it's not what they tell you. The question is, what are they not telling you?
That's a really good one. And what aren't they telling us here, right?
Exactly. And my mind's racing. There's literally, thousands of different things they could be conspiring with. We can go look at our economy, go look at the EU, how that's falling apart, look at the world banks, look at what's going on with the Bank of China. I mean, there's just so much going on, and good thing I'm not a political science major.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, you would be probably on the left if you were, but, because most of them are. But yeah, I guess we just have to be prepared for this onslaught for people who are pushing an agenda that they're not really being honest about. And the whole basis of what's going on here, Doctor, is really deception at a pretty deep level.
And, going back to the hate groups, a lot of them, they're deceiving themselves. That's even more profound, I think, when people can't be honest with themselves. And so it's problematic all the way around. So.
Absolutely. Well, Doctor, if we want to read more of your work, find out more about you, where's the best place to go?
Best place is mainstreammentalhealth.org. We're trying to make mental health issues mainstream.
And we got mass craziness going on now, that's for sure. And we'll have a link in the show notes to this interview on financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Sign up for the newsletter if you haven't done so already. And the Facebook page is Financial Survival Network. Twitter feed's at Kerry Lutz. Doctor, we'll talk to you again real soon. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.